This week on the PRESSURECAST, Dragon Quest Builders gets a sequel, Taco Bell teams up with Xbox, and we cover the latest PlayStation fiscal report. It's Monday, August 7th, 2017. Everything happening in the world of video games is here, now, on the PRESSURECAST. Hey, Pressure Pals, welcome to the 193rd episode of the PRESSURECAST, VideoGamesAreDumb.com's weekly news panic that posts every single Monday on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, TuneIn Radio, Google Play Music, and a bunch of other places. If you want to find the audio or video version of this episode, just check the description of this podcast or video, and you'll find it right there, so that way you can listen to the PRESSURECAST with some earbuds, or you can watch it on a screen. The choice is yours. But if you do enjoy the PRESSURECAST, do me a favor, do me a solid, please, 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 please. Give us 5 stars and a written review on iTunes, or share the video. Either way, please do that for me. Seriously, I want more viewers. I do. I'm asking you personally to give me more viewers. It's come to this, everyone. But anyway, we have a lot to get to this week. We have tons and tons and tons and tons of fiscal reports in the chart park. We have a lot of game announcements in the hype train. And of course, we're going to close everything out with everything that happened 10 years ago and beyond in strong history. But before we get to that, we're going to be closing out a segment of the show. That's right, we're going to have the final version of a segment on this show right now. It was a little something we liked to call Thank You for the Email. This was the segment where people called, text, emailed, or left a comment on the YouTube page giving me a question that I would have to answer. But don't worry, we're replacing it with something else, and I'll talk about that in just one moment. But before we get to that, let's answer Bad UK Player 87's question. Here's what he said. Hey Colin, I have a question to tackle your gaming expertise. A few years ago, games with rogue-like elements, sometimes called roguelites, popped up and were rather successful, e.g. Binding of Isaac, FTL, Spelunker. Spelunky. Spelunker was the original game. Almost got twisted. For myself, I prefer playing a rather difficult game with permadeath in combination with procedurally generated levels and content. He apparently enjoys these elements, but these ideas do not seem to be so compatible with the masses. However, it still feels to me that this movement of roguelites has slowed down. What is your take on that? Do you see these elements in recent games? Bad UK Player 87, thank you for the email. And you are absolutely right. Roguelites have been flooding the indie market for years now. My personal favorite being Rogue Legacy. If you've never played Rogue Legacy, I recommend you check that out, Bad UK Player. It's a game where you go into a castle and you fight things and then you die and then your son takes over. It's whatever. It's a long story, but it is available on the Vita, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. So check out Rogue Legacy if you get a chance. But it is true. It is absolutely true what you just said. There seemed to be a flood of these roguelite games. They were the new hotness for a while, and now they're kind of falling out of favor. What happened? Well, to address your point, or at least your point was the idea that they never hit AAA development, as many of the fans of that genre would have preferred. But I am here to tell you, Bad UK Player, that roguelites are everywhere, and they have been for a while now, so don't stress. But before we get to that, I want to tell you a personal story about a game that I very much love called Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which I realize sounds like I'm making a hard pivot to a different topic, but trust me, this is about the roguelites that we were just discussing. I remember back in 1997 when that game came out, and it blew me away. It took place inside of an enormous castle that had intersecting locations, sort of like a Metroid, and it played like a classic 2D hack and slash. But what really separated from other games was the inclusion of RPG elements and a loot system. After you killed a monster, you leveled up, and then you could collect loot to increase your attack and defense. It was amazing. Now, truth be told, it didn't invent these concepts whole cloth, but it was my first exposure to it, and so for years, I was expecting there to be more games that took these ideas and put it into their systems. But it didn't happen. I mean, for years it didn't happen. I kept thinking, oh, man, where's the next Castlevania Symphony of the Night? And eventually there was, but it was just more Castlevania games. I didn't understand why more games didn't borrow from this concept. But in 2007, Activision released Call of Duty for Modern Warfare, which completely revolutionized the way that online shooters worked. You leveled up after you got enough kills, you got new perks, and you gained access to new guns. It was amazing. And then a couple of years later, there was Demon Souls, which eventually produced Dark Souls, which those were basically 3D Metroidvanias. And now think of all of the 3D action games we have today with branching skill trees and experience systems. This year alone, I played Yakuza 0, Horizon Zero Dawn, Nier Automata, even Injustice 2, a fighting game, has introduced a progression level up system with loot. That's kind of crazy. So what I'm trying to say here is, yes, I was trying back in 1997 to find the next Castlevania Symphony of the Night because I wanted RPG systems and loot systems to be in action games, but it just didn't happen for a while. So there's going to be dark periods where the ideas that you've grown to appreciate are absent in the industry, but every single game plants a seed, and sooner or later, the audience that enjoys that game, say roguelikes, will grow up and become developers and make their own games that will be more in line with that AAA experience of, a roguelike. Heck, look around right now. You don't actually have to go that far. Look at Minecraft. That's one of the most popular games in the world. It's essentially a roguelike. There's randomly generated worlds, there's a survival mode with permadeath, and you have to scrounge around for items and crafting. Or what about No Man's Sky? Once again, you have to scour around for resources, crafting new materials, and the world is randomly generated. And they actually just added permadeath with a recent update. And let's not forget the brand new hotness of the summer, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. That's a multiplayer shooter, and it just became the #1 non-Steam game on Steam. I believe that's how you phrase it. Whatever, it had the top peak player count on Steam. The whole game is built around seeking out supplies and only having a single life, which is kind of like permadeath. So bad, UK player, I agree, the indie scene has certainly moved on from the roguelikes that we got only 3 years ago. But if you keep your eyes open, you'll see that roguelikes are everywhere, and slowly but surely they're going to become a mainstay in the AAA scene. Because like I said, those developers are going to grow up, they're going to be in charge, and they're going to want to make a roguelike. So, yes. That's my answer. But bad UK player, thank you for the email. And actually, I should mention that's the last time we'll ever say thank you for the email. Because frankly, we don't get enough responses. So that segment is getting cut. But I was doing some thinking, and I think thank you for the email is just kind of a bad segment in general. Because think about it, every single week I tell you guys, hey, give me a question. Question about what? That's kind of vague, isn't it? So I'm going to turn the tables, and I'm going to, instead of asking you for a question, I'm going to question you for an answer in a brand new segment we're going to call Tell Me Goddammit. That's right, this is the part of the show where I ask you, yes you, dear listener, or viewer, I should say, to tell me the answer to my weekly question. And if this works, we'll keep it going, and if it doesn't, I'll scrap it altogether. So here's my question for you. Back in June, the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy went on sale and has pretty much dominated the sales charts ever since then. Now, Activision's CEO Eric Hirschberg has said that the company is interested in doing more remasters of classic games. Here's what he said, quote, "This is a strategy that clearly has our attention, and while there are no new announcements today, I think you can be confident there will be more activity like this in the future with more great IP." Basically, it means that Crash Bandicoot, it got polished up, looks all PlayStation 4, but it still plays like a PlayStation 1 game. And that's pretty exciting, right? So I turn to you, Pressure Pals. What classic PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, or Sega Saturn game would you like to see given the Crash Bandicoot trilogy treatment? Now, I'm confining it to that one generation because that's where the whole Crash thing comes from. But there is still one rule to all of this. There's one rule that I want you to keep in mind when answering this question. Make sure, whatever the answer is, it is your deepest desire. I don't care if there are licenses involved. I don't care if the studio got shut down. I don't care if nobody would play it except for you. I just want to hear what is one classic game that you would like to see brought into current day graphics on a modern platform. You can email pressurecast@gmail.com. You can tweet at VGADumb. You can text or call 954-947-7377. All of the links are available in this episode's description, so just check right there and let me know. Or more specifically, tell me, goddammit. Cool? Cool. So that's going to be the new segment, and we'll get to that next week. And before... Sorry. I was so rudely interrupted. What I was trying to say is that next week we'll... What the hell is that? Boop, boop. Oh, obviously, it's the hype train. Feel the PR vibrations as we barrel towards Video Game Satisfaction Station on the hype train. This is the part of the show where we talk about all those upcoming video games and events to get you hyped up to spend all your money and become a video game guru. And we're going to start out by talking about a late-breaking story, Middle of Earth Shadow of War. There's some brand new news about this game, and we're still 2 months away from it being released in October, but I think we can all agree that, in general, the E3 presentation for Shadow of War was generally well received. It's been fairly high. However, over the weekend, the mood has swiftly changed when Monolith Productions announced the inclusion of real-world currency purchases. Just so that we can keep everyone up to speed, this is the follow-up to 2013's Shadow of Mordor, which was kind of like a hybrid between the Batman Arkham series and Lord of the Rings. I'm sure that you've seen it somewhere. Well, anyway, Shadow of War is going to be featuring an enhanced loot system in the form of chests. Yes, chests. We're going to be talking about microtransactions. In the game, players slowly build an army of orcs through mind control who proceed to fight for your side across the land of Middle Earth. Now, within these chests are going to be equipable gear such as weapons, defensive shields, as well as XP boosters. Now, Monolith has been quick to note that all of these items can be obtained through the game itself without having to spend any sort of money. You're going to be unlocking a currency called gold, and you'll get more gold for doing specific activities that you can then use that gold to purchase chests. However, gold can also be purchased on the PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, or Steam Store. Now, no prices were given for the gold, and also there were no prices listed for the chests in the gold amount. So we'll have to wait and see how that works out. And yeah, the internet just went berserk. In some circles, not everywhere, but in some circles, the internet went insane because they believe that Warner Brothers just killed off their most anticipated game of the year by introducing microtransactions. And normally, I would agree with them. Normally, I would be a bit concerned because microtransactions usually affect quality, or they have historically. But just reading past what WB has said and what Monolith has said, almost every statement they made was followed by, this is only for your orc army, and you can unlock this in the actual game. You don't need to spend any money. And the reason I trust Warner Brothers when it comes to microtransactions is because they just released Injustice 2, which right before that came out, they announced a whole loot system where you could buy chests and you could upgrade your heroes, give them brand new gear. And honestly, I thought that was going to ruin Injustice 2. Turns out it didn't have much of an impact at all. Still a great fighting game. So as long as I am playing Shadow of War, and it is similar to Shadow of Mordor, it's still a third-person game where I'm sneaking into orc bases, cutting off heads. I'm good. I don't really care. It's not that big of a deal to me. But let me make this clear. I understand why people are concerned because this does look bad. It's a late game addition because we're 2 months away and now we just hear about this. But something tells me there's more to, these chests than just simple microtransactions. Like, maybe there's another game within the game, like a specific mode where this matters more. And if that's the case, just don't play that mode. Or maybe it will actually be terrible and ruin the game. But let's just wait and see how it shakes out. Because Warner Brothers' track record, they've been pretty good when it comes to microtransactions. Just when it comes to microtransactions, not PC releases. I saw some PC fans were really mad about this. I'm like, really? You were going to buy this after Arkham Knight and Mortal Kombat X? What are you doing? What are you doing? Anyway, toot toot. Here's another story that came out of nowhere. Square Enix has announced a sequel to last year's Dragon Quest Builders. Unlike the first game, Dragon Quest Builders 2 will launch not only on the PlayStation 4, but also on the Nintendo Switch. During a press conference, the team showed off the first snippets of gameplay showing a hero swim underwater, climb on top of a mountain, and run through a desert before building his home. In case you're somehow not aware, Dragon Quest Builders is a sort of hybrid between RPG and Minecraft, leaning more towards Minecraft, but also in the Dragon Quest world. No release date was given, and they did not even mention a Western release. So, I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but when I saw this story, I was like, oh wow, Dragon Quest Builders, what was that on last time? Was that also on the PlayStation 4? Yeah, it was. Wasn't it also on the Vita? Why isn't the Vita listed for this game? And my guess is, because the Vita really truly probably is dead. And the reason I say that is because the Vita version of Dragon Quest Builders actually outsold the PlayStation 4 version in Japan. Now, in terms of global sales, the PlayStation 4 version actually outsold the Vita version, but that's taking the UK and US markets into account. So, not to mention that in terms of physical sales, Dragon Quest Builders was the second best selling Vita game of 2016 worldwide. Just speaking of physical sales, second best selling Vita game worldwide. And the top best was World of Final Fantasy. So if Square Enix is releasing a brand new game and they're walking away from the Vita and they're moving over to the Switch, even though they had the two best-selling retail games on that platform last year, who's left? Well, don't answer that, because the next story is actually about who's left on the Vita. Here we go. Toot toot. Let's move on to the grooviest news story of the week. Atlas Games has revealed 2 new games set in the Persona universe, but before you get too excited, no, they are not RPGs. Persona 3 Dancing Moon Knight and Persona 5 Dancing Star Knight have been announced for the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation Vita, both of which will be released in the spring of 2018 in Japan, like really close together. No word on if they will come to the West, and obviously no word on when they would come to the West. The original in the series, Persona 4 Dancing All Night, was originally released back in 2015 and was a PlayStation Vita exclusive. So, when I read this story, I was a bit surprised. It's one thing to follow up a game and have a sequel. That's normal. It's another thing to follow up a game and have 2 sequels out at the same time, unless you're like a Pokemon title. But having 2 separate games, because as far as I can tell, they really are going to be separate games. One is going to be about the Persona 3 characters, and then one's going to be about the Persona 5 characters. That seems like a bit much, but I guess Dancing All Night did well enough to warrant this, right? Nope. I did a bit of research, and the best I could come up with was VG charts, which I know is not the most reputable source, but it's better than nothing. And according to them, Dancing All Night only sold 370,000 units worldwide. So why exactly are they doubling down and releasing 2 games at the same time? Well, if I had to guess, this is Sega, who owns Atlus. This is them taking on a more managerial role in Atlus's release schedule. And second, both of these games are coming to the PlayStation 4, which has over 6 times the install base of the Vita. That's probably why they probably looked at that and said, well, it didn't sell very well, but it didn't sell very well on the Vita. You know, if you put that on the PlayStation 4, it easily would go over 1 million. Hopefully. Not to mention, Persona 5 just came out, and that is the best-selling game in Atlus history, so maybe they're just trying to strike while the audience is there. Now, personally speaking, I love rhythm games. I really do, but I didn't like Dancing All Night. I played that on the Vita, and the interface is all over the place. It's hard to keep track of the musical cues, and the background is really, really flashy, which also makes it hard to keep track of the musical cues. But I'm happy to see that I'm happy to see that fans out there we'll have more Persona 3 stuff. That's always good news for everyone. Toot toot. Following the smash success of Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Champions, Capcom recently announced plans to focus more on Switch releases. And last week, the company revealed the 2013 3DS title Resident Evil Revelations would be re-released on the Switch sometime later this year. Now, Revelations will be coming to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 on August 29th and will include all of the DLC from the original game, but there's no release date planned right now for the Switch version. Remember last week when we were covering the whole Street Fighter Switch sales thing, and I said that Capcom, the first thing Capcom is going to do to follow this up is just release more Resident Evil games on the Switch? Well, there you go. So this really shouldn't be that huge of a surprise. I know Street Fighter and Mega Man are probably the most recognizable franchises from Capcom, but Resident Evil reaches a far, far, far wider audience thanks to the films. And yes, probably like you, I hate the movies. They're god fucking awful. They don't make any sense, and the action isn't even that good. But when Capcom re-released Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, and the remake, they all did really, really well. They happened to correspond that with the last movie release, and they all sold really well. I mean, nothing mind-blowing at all. They sold well enough. They were extremely simple port jobs. These are practically free games with free money for Capcom, practically. So it worked out for them. And as we talked about last week, Capcom has had a few bad years. They need to pick up revenue and profit because they have been inconsistent quarter to quarter to year. And if anything, actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm a bit surprised they picked Revelations for the first game to be coming to the Switch. I figured they would go with Resident Evil 4, just like they did on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but I guess they were already pushing out Revelations, so I guess they'll save money on a marketing campaign. I don't know. Toot toot. Moving over to sports games, EA Sports has announced that this year's NBA Live will include teams from the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association. This marks the first time the WNBA will appear in a video game since its foundation back in 1996. Of course, EA has a history of including women's teams in their games. In 2015, FIFA introduced 12 women's soccer teams, which was pretty cool back then. Now, NBA Live will arrive on the Xbox and PlayStation 4 sometime this year. They still don't have a release date, and will mark the first console entry since 2015. The reason I mentioned that last bit there about they haven't released NBA Live in a while is because it's the reason I have very mixed feelings on this announcement. First of all, I think it's awesome that the WNBA is being included, as I just don't think they could have a standalone WNBA game at this moment. So I think it's really, really cool we're getting the WNBA in one way or another. And EA already has a basketball game. They're already making it. Why not include the women teams? Why not? It makes sense. Now, having said that, the NBA Live franchise hasn't been very good in about, let me do a little bit of math here, a decade, maybe more. They straight up didn't release a console game between 2009 and 2013 because they sold so poorly. In fact, the only thing consistent with NBA Live is that they make mobile titles. And I know some people get a little defensive whenever I bring this up, but the NBA 2K series is light years ahead of Live in almost every way. I know people don't like it when you praise 2K too much because they already get enough credentials. Not credentials. They get enough credit. Whatever. Live has had a pretty interesting interface for a few years. The way that you do free throws is kind of cool, but beyond that, nothing feels right. The character models are ugly, and the announcers are all jittery compared to 2K, where everything is polished to a sheen. And as sad as it is to say, I hope the thing that happens out of all this is that somehow this convinces 2K Games to include the WNBA in next year's games. Because seriously, you've got the European teams in there. You've got the European teams that nobody cares about. And you don't have the WNBA? Come on, 2K. Whatever. Toot toot. Speaking of 2K, yet another NBA 2K will arrive this fall, as it has every single year since 1999. However, while the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, and 360 will receive a physical and digital release on September 19th when the game comes out next month, the Nintendo Switch version will be strictly digital with a physical release coming, quote, fall 2017, end quote. And that's really the whole story right there, but I think this is the most surprising news maybe of the week. This actually shocks me. I know it seems really, really small, like who cares? It's just some basketball game that's coming out on the Switch, but think about this for a moment. First of all, the most surprising news I should really say is that it's coming out on the PlayStation 3 and 360. It's 2017 and we're still supporting decade-old consoles with sports games. I know they did that with the PSP and the PS2, but usually it's just a roster update. I don't know, I'm surprised. Especially because WWE 2K is not coming out on those old systems. But whatever. Seriously, what's going on with the Switch release? This game's coming out next month, and we haven't seen a single video or screenshot of the Switch version. And I know some people might not see that as a big deal, but go back and watch the Switch reveal trailer last fall, and you'll see the only games they showed off were Mario, Skyrim, and NBA 2K. I don't know about you, but that would lead me to assume that this was a pretty big priority and a pretty serious undertaking by 2K Games. But now they won't even have the game on store shelves? Is this going to feel like early access? Are we just going to have this weird download version that's going to be all buggy, and then finally when they fix everything, we'll get a physical release? Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. Not to mention, is this going to be the current gen version or the last gen version? Are we getting that PlayStation 3 and 360 version on the Switch, or are we getting the current gen version bumped down a little bit more? Who knows? No idea. So some pretty concerning stuff. Really strange. Toot toot. Anyway, back during the Xbox press conference. I just mentioned Xbox, we just lost half our viewers. I'm not even kidding. I check the analytics. Every time we go move over to Xbox News, we lose the viewers. Well, this does affect PlayStation, if that helps at all. You babies. Anyway, back during the Xbox press conference, it was announced that Minecraft was embarking on a brand new cross-platform effort known as Minecraft for All, where the game would connect between the Xbox One, PC, mobile, and even the Nintendo Switch, and worlds could be shared. But what does this mean about the PlayStation 4? Well, Microsoft has not deliberately cut out the PlayStation 4. This is not a spiteful move from Microsoft. In fact, it's actually Sony that is still preventing their consoles from being cross-platform compatible. According to the blog post from developer Mojang, who make Minecraft, here's what they had to say. Quote, While we are thrilled to be able to confirm the new version of Minecraft is coming to the Nintendo Switch, we are still in discussions with Sony about PlayStation and have nothing to confirm. We would love to work with Sony to bring players on PlayStation 4 into this new ecosystem as well." End quote. Of course, this isn't the first game to run into Sony's policy. Psynox has repeatedly stated that they'd like to have Rocket League be cross-platform with everyone, but the only holdout, of course, is Sony. This might not seem like a huge deal. After all, Minecraft has already sold 1 billion copies, so it's not like it's going to affect sales. But from my perspective, this continuous reluctance to embrace cross-platform services is going to hurt Sony in the long run. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand why Sony is doing this. They're in first place. They have the most consoles sold, and allowing cross-platform play would just be a favor to Xbox and Nintendo. That's all it's going to help out, is just Xbox and Nintendo for the time being. But who's to say where Sony will be in the future? I pointed this out in the past, but it's always the industry leader that's the most inflexible. Once they get beaten down a little bit, they start to loosen up. And for instance, like if this was 10 years ago, I highly doubt the Microsoft of the Xbox 360 era would be allowing cross-platform play. But by cutting out all other platforms, Sony is essentially telling its Minecraft players to go pick up a Switch or an Xbox One or a PC or play it on your mobile tablet, which is just a bad idea. A lot can change in a generation, and this is clearly where the industry is heading. If Nintendo is on board, that's where the industry is going, because they are always the last holdout. So Sony might want to change that stance before it becomes mandatory, because by then, maybe their systems will be less popular? I don't know. Anyway, toot toot. And real quick, we have 2 new additions to Xbox One backwards compatibility, starting off with the 2012 Epic Mickey 2, The Power of 2. According to Jim Sterling, here's what he had to say about that game. Quote, "The Power of 2 has no such charm to hide behind. It's gormless, chafing, unquestionably horrid little waste of time." End quote. So I guess he liked it. Up next, we have the re-release of the Sega Genesis classic Toe Jam and Earl, which, now that I think about it, is a randomly generated world, kind of like a roguelike, and it's 2-player. How about that? But being honest, I've never been a fan of Toe Jam and Earl. Actually, I like Toe Jam and Earl 2 better, which I know is heresy to some Sega fans, but real recognize real. Toot toot. Here's a name that doesn't come up on the PRESSURECAST enough. Harmonix has announced a new season pass for Rock Band 4. Arriving on August 24th of this year, the second Spotlight Pass will give users 1 new song per week over the course of 8 weeks. The songs will be apparently new inclusions to Rock Band 4 and will be available in the Rivals section of the game. So, you can tell for including Harmonix, it's kind of a weird week, right? We never talk about Harmonix. But I guess I'm just surprised in general to see that Rock Band 4 is still around and still being supported, because from what I understand, that game only sold around 1.2 million copies over the course of 2 years, which is not great. And I understand that the series has never sold particularly well if you actually look at the sales charts we used to get from the NPD, but they would sell a shit ton of DLC, back in the day at least. And especially there were more parties, there were more people getting together that would also encourage them to buy more DLC. I'm sure you remember back in the day, there were plenty of people that played Rock Band. I'm sure you played Rock Band. But do you know anyone today, anyone that still plays Rock Band? I don't. And I love Rock Band. And I don't even play it. What does that say? But this actually connects to our next story really well, so let's just move along. Toot toot. Also last week, Harmonix announced that their 2012 digital-only title Rock Band Blitz will be removed from the Xbox Live and PlayStation Network on August 28th. This game is currently, and presumably will always only be available on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. Harmonix has stated the game will never become backwards compatible, and they are not going to be re-releasing it on PlayStation 4 or whatever. So if you're interested, it only costs $15. So just to catch everybody up for a second, Rock Band Blitz was essentially a Rock Band game that was centered around a controller. You just had to press the left trigger and the right trigger, sort of like Frequency. You'd move between highways and play different instruments, but it wasn't as good as Frequency and it wasn't very memorable. But this just got me thinking about the current state of Harmonix and just how screwed they are. Seriously, just screwed. When you look at any developer, we're going to be talking a lot of financial news in the chart park. And when you look at any developer or any publisher, it doesn't really matter who they are. They generally will make money off of their back catalog. That's where they pull in some money. They can lower the price of their older games and bring in the cheapskate sales and bring in some easy cash when no one else will buy that game. But Harmonix really doesn't have that luxury because they only have access to a certain library of music for a certain amount of time on a certain platform, and once they move on, that game is dead. It is over because that's all part of a legal agreement with someone else that owns that property, the music publisher or the individual artist. Now, if you look at the current state of music right now, just today, it really doesn't work because this entire model doesn't fit with the way that people consume music anymore. And no, this has nothing to do with rock music losing fans or rock music isn't as good as it used to be. There are still tons of really great rock bands releasing amazing songs every single year. But that's the problem. There's too much music in 2017 between SoundCloud, Spotify, random YouTube videos. Seriously, even YouTube videos. It's impossible to keep up with everything that's going on in music. You just kind of gotta go with whatever you're into at the moment. And that's not to say that wasn't a similar problem back when Rock Band first came out onto the scene, but the age of legal streaming was so expensive and so restrictive, people still had that central zeitgeist. Like, oh, we're gonna play Boston's More Than a Feeling. Yeah! What's that today? What's that song today? I really don't know. And I just don't think that's going to happen anymore. It's over. There's not going to be a large group of artists that everyone knows anymore. That is shrinking as it is. And the only ones left are not going to be licensing their music to a poor-selling video game. I'm sorry. Like, who are you going to go get next? Bruno Mars? I don't think he's into it. Like, really, I can't think of too many artists that just unify everyone. Jay-Z? That doesn't really fit with Rock Band. And it's funny because I look at rhythm music right now, the genre, and it's still kind of healthy. It just depends on where you look. Like, I might not be the biggest fan of Hatsune Miku games, but they have their audience, and they have complete ownership of their music. They own that license, and they can sell or port those games indefinitely. So if I were Harmonix, I would rip that off. I would invent a character, do a Parappa the Rappa or Guitar Man, or get into a new genre, because basing your success off of the current state of popular music is going to be your death. It's going to be your death. Like, seriously, I'm just waiting for the moment where it turns out Harmonix got shut down or they got purchased by Hasbro or some weird bullshit and they don't make video games anymore. Just waiting on it at this point. Toot toot. Let's move on to a cheerier note. We were speaking of games getting delisted, right? So let's talk about another game that's getting delisted. EA has announced that FIFA 14 will be removed from the EA Vault. The Vault, of course, is part of EA Access, which is a service available on the PC and Xbox One for a monthly fee. And this marks the first time ever that a game has been removed from the Vault since it launched 3 years ago. So what exactly happened? Well, no one is quite sure. EA has said, quote, FIFA 14 is being removed from the vault due to a unique circumstance specific to a title. It does not indicate a change in our priorities for the EA Access and Origins Access Vault, which continue to be providing blah, 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 whatever, more speak, end quote. They went on to mention that the servers for FIFA 14 will also be closing. EA has repeatedly stated games won't be removed from the vault, and even then, this game got removed. And that's basically the whole story. And before anyone goes off and says, EA, you're a bunch of liars, I think it's safe to assume this was not EA's call. After all, FIFA games are mostly licensed properties on top of other licensed properties. You've got team logos, player faces, commentary tracks, music and stadiums, loads of different things. And if any one of those parties puts up a fuss, I'm pretty sure EA will just likely shut the whole thing down rather than pay them more money. And really, that's the right choice. You can't blame EA. They already have FIFA 15, 16, and 17 in the vault. Is removing a 4-year-old version of the same game really a deal breaker for anyone? I don't think so. Anyway, toot toot. Let's go on and talk about the games that are going to be coming out this week. On Tuesday, Hellblade's what is the name of the hell? What is this game? Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice? It's going to be on the PlayStation 4 PC. That's made by Ninja Theory, the same guys that made the last Devil May Cry. Really good studio, so keep your eyes peeled on that. Mega Man Legacy Collection 2 will be on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Black Hole Complete Edition will be on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Cat Quest will be on the PC, sounds like my kind of game. Cinemora EX will be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Physically, you can actually go out and get a physical copy of that game now. Batman The Enemy Within, Episode 1, The Enigma will be out on damn near everything. Phones, tablets, PlayStation 3, 360, whatever. whatever. If you got it, it probably plays it. Lawbreakers will be out on the PC and PlayStation 4. Looking forward to that one. Comet Crash 2, the Chroncoid Wars will be out on the PC. Cool. Icy will be on the PlayStation 4. On Wednesday, West of Loathing will be on the PC. Ironcast will be on the Nintendo Switch. On Friday, Rogue Stormers will be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. World of West will be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And finally, on Friday, The Escapist 2 will be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and PC. Boop, boop. That's going to do it for the Hype Train. Thank you, Hype Train, beloved Hype Train, but it is getting muggy in here. We need to step outside, and I know the perfect place where it's always warm with the glow of cold hard cash. That's right, it's time for the Chart Park, the land where money grows on trees. Yes, the Chart Park. This is the part of the show where we talk about the legal, business, and financial news in the video game industry, and we find out which fat cats of Wall Street are going to tip their top hats towards Lady Luck. And we're starting off with Sony news because Sony has released its first quarter results for 2017, and the results add some much-needed context to the Xbox news we had last week. How? We'll get to that in just a moment. Starting off, the whole division of Game and Network increased by 5.4% year-on-year. This totaled 348.1 billion yen. Yes, yen. We're going to be talking about a Japanese company. We're not talking about dollars. And if you're getting confused, just move the decimal point over to the left twice and it'll make more sense. So around 3.1 billion, including exchange rates. Somewhere around there. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Network-specific revenue also rose 34.2% compared to the same quarter last year. Hardware, however, told the very different story as revenue dropped 17.5%. Operating income of Games and Network, which is where PlayStation is located in the Sony brand, fared far worse, falling 59.7% year-on-year, totaling 17.7 billion yen, a far cry from last year's 26.3 billion yen for the exact same quarter. Sony cited a lack of major first-party games as well as the lower cost of consoles for the drop in operating income. I guess Horizon Zero Dawn does not count anymore, even though that sold very, very well. However, Sony is still optimistic regarding the rest of the fiscal year, forecasting 1.98 trillion yen for the division. That's a 4.8% upward increase revision from their prior estimate. So they had an estimate for how the rest of the year was going to shake out. They've revised it 4.8% upward. So that's good news, right? As for Sony as a whole, the entire company, the quarter was far more favorable, bringing in 1.8 trillion in revenue. That's up 15.2% from the same period last year, and operating income totaled 157.6 billion yen. And finally, the most important number, of course, is shipped units. The PlayStation 4 has reached 63.3 million consoles shipped, not sold, shipped. That's up 3.3 million from the prior quarter. To date, the PlayStation 4 has sold 60.4 million units altogether. At least that's the last number we were given at E3 2017. So you might assume this was a bad period for PlayStation, but I do think it is worth pointing out that last year, or was it the beginning of this year, Sony even mentioned that hardware sales were going to drop off. They were going to begin to slow down. But a 17% drop, at least to me, even with all the price cuts, that tells me that the PlayStation 4 Pro isn't picking up the slack. Remember that they cut the price of the Slim and then they released the Pro. That way they could make up for potential lost revenue, but apparently the Pro isn't doing nearly as well as they might have estimated. But earlier I mentioned the Xbox One, and I wanted to do a bit of comparing and contrasting of these two separate companies. Now obviously we will not be able to compare the companies as a whole because that would be pointless. Microsoft is nearly double the size of Sony, but as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Xbox hardware sales were down for the quarter 29% year on year compared to the PlayStation 4's dropping off of 17% year on year. Now of course these aren't exact numbers because Microsoft doesn't release those, but we all know PlayStation 4 drastically outpaced the Xbox One, so this is all relative anyway. We're just basing it off of percentages. I mean, these numbers are based off of that division's own history. So it makes sense, right? I hope so. But yes, this does mean that general hardware sales across the board for the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 are down. Down significantly? No. Well, maybe more for the Xbox One, but noticeably for the PlayStation 4, with the one exception out of all hardware sales being the Nintendo Switch. And that's because Nintendo has a new console. And if that doesn't make any sense, why does it matter if it's a new console? Let's talk about saturation for just one moment. There are a finite amount of customers interested in purchasing a product. And chances are, if you own a PlayStation 4 and you live alone in a studio apartment, you don't need another PlayStation 4. You're good, which is why we're seeing these mid-generation refreshes like the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro. They were attempting to curtail that drop-off. However, the Nintendo Switch is a brand new product. They haven't even remotely met demand yet. So Nintendo is in its own little world right now. We really can't compare it to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One at the moment. Which, by the way, I was thinking about this. If the sales for the Switch continue as is, this will be the very first successful mid-generation console. Think about that. It's kind of neat. So anyway, yes, hardware sales are down compared to last year. And I know they cite lower priced consoles, but like I said, the Pro was supposed to pick up the slack to prevent a significant drop-off like that. Well, not significant, but a major drop-off like that. But what I'm really curious about is next quarter. Because last year, that quarter is where the Xbox One had that winning streak of a few different months. I believe it started in... Am I started in June? Am I started in June or am I started in July? And then went on for like 3 months, where month after month, the Xbox One actually beat the PlayStation 4. I'm curious to see if that's going to happen again, because with the Nintendo Switch being out there and the PlayStation 4 Slim being out this time, I'm not sure how well Xbox is going to do, or if they'll even take a single month prior to November when the Xbox One X comes out. And I'm really curious to see if the Xbox One X will be the PlayStation 4 and Switch in November. We'll just have to wait and see. But I hope everyone does well, because when everybody does well, the industry is healthy, and then everybody's happy because they got jobs, and that's good news. Anyway, moving on. If that last story was too much detail for you, I promise you'll like this one better. Square Enix has released their latest earnings report for the quarter, though specific information was slim to none. Net sales saw positive growth from the same period last year. Last year it was 51.1 billion yen. This year it was 57 billion yen. That's net sales altogether. Much of this was thanks to their mobile division, accounting for 23.7 billion yen of sales. That's an insane amount of money. That's nearly half. That's up by 4 billion yen compared to the same period last year. The MMOs Final Fantasy XIV and Dragon Quest X saw a significant increase, bringing in 9.3 billion yen, over 30% more than any one quarter last year. So their MMO business is banging. However, sorry, got a bit of thing in the throat. All right, good. However, operating income dropped from 8.9 billion yen to 3.9 billion yen. That's down 56.1%, which is pretty bad for operating income. Square Enix went so far as to warn their investors of inconsistent returns for software, citing the rapid growth of phone and tablets and the stagnation of the console market paired with the increase in competition. That's an ominous ending to that entire story, right? What the hell does that mean? I thought consoles were doing good. I mean, they're down a little bit, but they're not dropping off entirely. Relax, that's not what Square Enix is talking about. What they're saying is that hardware, that's all good. They're talking about games. And it's hard not to agree with them. When we look at the charts from week to week, as we do every single week, we see the games that are in the top spot and all the way down to the top 10. And it seems to change every single month because the audience is becoming increasingly fickle. So if your game isn't called Grand Theft Auto, you're probably seeing peak sales within the first month before dropping off entirely. Which is funny because I remember last year there were all of these industry analysts that were citing the idea of a longer tail for video games and saying, oh, no, you release the game at full price and then you drop it by this percent the next month and the next month and the next month, and saying that was a good business model. But if Square Enix is like, hey, shit's gonna get inconsistent, don't, this is not a sure bet. Every time we put out something, it's gonna hit and then it's gonna fall off. I guess that kind of proves that model is not true, especially because there's a huge barrage of AAA games in the market right now. Every single week there's brand new AAA games. I can totally attest to that. I've done 20 episodes of Worth It this year, and I've hardly done any small games. I've done mostly AAA games. That's not by design, that's just that there's more of them, and they're all really, really, really good games. It's hard to stand out. Even something like Nier Automata, that's right next to The Legend of Zelda, that's right next to Horizon Zero Dawn, that's right next to any number of games, actually. What did I just play? Splatoon 2. There's so much good stuff out there. And when everything is top-notch, how do you stand out? So it's going to get more brutal every single year, especially when you're a publisher. So you really need to diversify into, phones and tablets rather than relying on consoles, because maybe put out one game, something that can really stand out. Because if you're putting out multiple games and you're competing against yourself, you're screwed. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of big publishers, let's talk about the third largest in the world, Activision Blizzard, because they just released their quarterly reports, which of course ended on June 30th. Console game sales totaled $568 million. Yes, we're back in dollars, no more yen for the time being. We'll be back in yen in no time. That's actually down 13% year on year, which is what happens when you don't have Black Ops 3. We'll talk about that in a second. PC sales brought in $508 million in revenue. That's actually up nearly a quarter, 24% year on year. But we're talking about Blizzard after all. They kind of have the whole PC game on lockdown. And though we didn't get exact sales numbers here, Activision did say that their mobile division saw 407 million monthly active users. Blizzard accounts for 46 million, while Activision accounts for 47 million monthly active users. We're talking about mobile devices right here. Altogether, that is up by 38% year on year. But then again, Activision Blizzard owns King Games, the people that make things like Candy Crush. So of course that's going to happen. This looks to be another another big year for Activision Blizzard. They even mentioned that Call of Duty pre-orders are really strong. And like I mentioned before, that's really the missing piece here. Mobile is doing great, thanks in large part to King. Blizzard is just awesome on PC, and StarCraft HD is going to do wonders when that releases. But when it comes to console sales, why were they down? It's because they didn't have that big Call of Duty hit. They needed a Black Ops 3, instead they got an Infinite Warfare. Do you hear anybody talking about Infinite Warfare anymore? I still hear people talking about Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare not so much. But personally speaking, I think this World War II thing is going to be a complete hit. It's going to... I won't say it's going to outsell Black Ops 3, but I think it's definitely going to do a lot better than Infinite Warfare. Anyway, who's ready to go back to yen? I hope you are, because Sega Sammy also released their quarterly report for the last quarter. Altogether, sales were up 37 billion yen, totaling 107.2 billion yen compared to the last year's quarter of 70.6 billion yen. So what brought in all that extra money? You know, was it a brand new Sega game? Ooh, was it Persona 5? Nope. It was Pachinko, because Pachinko brought in 54.9 billion yen compared to last year's 21.2 billion yen. Apparently they have new Pachinko machines that are really taking the whole Japanese industry by storm. At least that's what I read. Sega did cite Phantasy Star Online 2 and Persona 5 sales as positive, but updated numbers for those games were not given. At last check, Persona 5 has sold 1.8 million units, but those numbers are kind of old. And if that sounds kind of small, if you're like, what? Persona's only sold 1.8 billion, not billion, I'm getting my yen confused, 1.8 million units? I don't understand. I thought that game is supposed to be really big. Well, it's not a big number, but then again, Atlas isn't very big. They only have 210 employees altogether, and they produce a bunch of different games. But that also means they don't have much overhead, and they balance their budgets and their team sizes so that they can take as much time as they want to make a game. So don't worry about Atlas. As for Sega, who knows how the rest of the year is going to shake out. They're rolling the dice on Sonic again. This month we have the indie title Sonic Mania, because I know it's not an indie title, but it really is, because they've outsourced this to a group of fans, which actually has me more optimistic than usual about a Sonic game. But on the other side, we have Sonic Forces, which is a higher budget, and I don't know, Sonic Team... Here's my thing. If Sonic Forces doesn't hit, I think it's over for 3D Sonic. I think it's absolutely over for 3D Sonic. If that sounds drastic, hear me out. Sonic Team and all the 3D games of the past generation, they had the excuse of being on the Wii U. Being like, oh, we're Wii U exclusive. There's not many Wii U's out there. That's why our game isn't selling, which was a total joke, because Wii U had a wonderful attach rate. People that owned Mario Kart and Bayonetta and all those games, they didn't seem to have a problem, just Sonic did. So if Sonic is going to be multi-platform, it's going to be on the PlayStation 4, it's going to be on the Xbox One, it's going to be on the Switch, it's going to be on the PC, and it doesn't perform well, I think 3D Sonic is going to be on ice. Just saying. And now onto our final quarterly report, and I hope you're enjoying these because they are everything that drives the industry. Seriously, if you're wondering why they don't make a sequel to that random cult classic game that you love so much, it's probably because they're not doing very well fiscally. Just saying. Anyway, Take-Two, who of course put out the 2K games, as well as the Rockstar games, put out their fiscal report, and they start off the fiscal year right. First off, net revenue totaled $418.2 million. That's up 34% year on year. That's an insane amount. So how about net sales? Well, they reached $384.3 million. That's up 28% year on year. Digital revenue, 268.2%. That's up 56%. Nope. Digital revenue was $268.2 million. That's up 56%. And digital net sales were $280.9 million. That's up 47% for digital net sales. Now, I know it's extremely narrow-minded to say this is Grand Theft Auto and old Grand Theft Auto, but a lot of this is Grand Theft Auto. And I have a bit of a conspiracy theory as to why they did so well in this quarter. So hear me out. Think back. When exactly did Rockstar and Take-Two get in trouble for taking down all those GTA mods? June. When did those games get hit with all those bad Steam reviews? June. When did the quarter end? June 30th. And this is what I mean to say, or this is what people say when they say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Grand Theft Auto dominated social media, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, everywhere. People were talking about these mods being removed from Grand Theft Auto 5. They were mad about it, but it didn't matter because it just increased product awareness. And I'm sure there were people out there that were like, oh wow, yeah, Grand Theft Auto, I forgot about that. People are still playing that? All right, I'll jump in. They went out and got themselves a copy. Now call me crazy, but when GTA has a record-breaking quarter, I'm going to look to where it got the most attention. And it got the most attention in June. Conspiracy theory, but I'm just going to put that out there. Anyway, moving on, Tencent. We're going to talk about Tencent now, and you probably heard their name, you've probably played their games, and yet no one really talks about them. Well, to fill you in, they own Riot Games, the developers of League of Legends. Obviously, that's a pretty big game. If you're a fan of Clash & Clans, they own a majority stake in Supercell. That's another big game. They've also got a stake in Pocket Gems, Glue Mobile, Robot Entertainment, and more. And they also own 40% of Epic Games, the developers of Gears of War, Fortnite, and Unreal Engine. Well, last week, they spent £17.7 million, yes, British currency, to acquire 9% of Frontier Developments, best known for their games Planet Coaster and Elite Dangerous. Addressing the news, Frontier CEO David Braben, that's his name, why not? Here's what he had to say, quote, "The strategic investment will help drive our scales up and improve access and accelerate our growth into the key Chinese market. Tencent will be a powerful partner for Frontier in what will soon be the world's largest market for entertainment," end quote. He's basically talking about China there. And that's important to note that Tencent is a Chinese company. I wish I had more to say on this though, but I frankly don't understand Tencent. They just look to me to be a Chinese Vivendi. They have money everywhere in so many different avenues, but clearly they see something in Frontier that they want to bring over to China, which smart on them. Very, very smart on them, because from what I understand, Elite Dangerous and Planet Coaster are really good games. Anyway, enough of this dusty bank talk. I want to move on to the biggest news story of the year, possibly the decade. Taco Bell and Xbox have joined forces. I'll give you a moment to gather your thoughts right there. Just take a deep breath. Okay, welcome to the future. That's right, the greatest restaurant ever will begin a promotion to give away Xbox One X's between August 31st and October 4th. And I believe they said something like we're giving away a console every 10 minutes. Not only that, the inventor of the double-decker taco will also be giving away copies of Forza 7 and Xbox Live subscriptions. All you gotta do is buy a $5 steak Quesarito box. They just make shit up. This is turning into a commercial, isn't it? We're gonna have to skip past that. All kidding aside though, Taco Bell is amazing and I highly recommend it. You should definitely go there. Whenever I hear about fast food, I always hear people, whenever I talk about Taco Bell, people are always quick to point out, that's not real Mexican food. No shit. Where do you go for fast food that has real food? What, Wendy's? That sucks balls. McDonald's? They fuck up everything besides a cup of coffee. Burger King? Burger King's alright, I'm not going to throw shade there. But this is a smart move on Microsoft's part. Taco Bell speaks to a certain generation that plays video games, and usually a partnership between Taco Bell and a video game manufacturer generally works. I honestly wonder where the PlayStation VR would be were it not for Taco Bell, and I'm not kidding about that. I remember when Sony was relying mostly on Taco Bell commercials to get the word out about the PlayStation VR, and it clearly worked. So if Taco Bell can sell a $500 accessory, I'm sure they can sell a $500 console. Smart move on Microsoft and Taco Bell's part. Moving on from other products selling video games to video games selling other products, we turn our attention to Jhair Gel, a product line that, from what I can tell, only exists in Japan. And yet, they've turned to an American to sell their signature ultra hard gel. None other than Street Fighter's Guile. That's right. Not only did Guile engage in a photo shoot where he performed an interview where he enthusiastically praised the hair gel, he also tried the hair gel on for himself. And yes, this is real. This is real. You can go to the Jhair Gel website and read this interview and look at the photos. Here's what he said. Here's what Guile said. The real person, Guile, the American hero. Quote, "The story has become long. Today I'm honored to have come to Japan and meet Jay of Hair Gel." I used Google Translate for this. "Everyone will have their duties every day. From now on, I will walk with Ultra Hard Gel Jay. Jay has classes, super wet and super hard as well. I also want everyone to choose their own Jay according to their own way of life. Thank you so much for today. Thank you." End quote. Wow. Guile. We're trying to create jobs here in America, and you're hawking Japanese hair gel? You just sonic blew it. Next story. Psychic powers. Future premonitions. Do they actually exist? Well, if you ask the Psychic Readers Network, they certainly do. And over the years, they've made a business off of people calling their hotlines and asking for advice. Yes, really. Stop laughing. Anywho, according to these psychics, they see a vision of Rockstar Games in court. That's right, the Psychic Readers Network is suing Rockstar Games over the character Auntie Paulette from Grand Theft Auto Vice City, who was voiced by Uriel Del Harris. The network has a vested interest in the portrayal of Miss Harris's work because she also appeared in a number of their ads playing the character Miss Cleo, a psychic with a strong Jamaican accent. If you are of a certain age, I'm sure you remember Miss Cleo, Call Me Now, all that stuff. According to the Psychic Network, Vice City is using their creation without any sort of compensation and allege that Rockstar has made $500 million through this character somehow. Of course, Rockstar has denied any wrongdoing, calling the claims, quote, entirely meritless and completely ridiculous, end quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I love Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It is my second favorite Grand Theft Auto game, bar none. I adore the stories, I love the music, I love the characters, I love everything about Vice City. And I have absolutely no recollection of this character existing, and I did everything in Vice City. So if I can't remember that, let alone the idea that it was actually voiced by the real Miss Cleo, who else remembers that? Best of luck, Psychic Network. I don't see you winning this. Anyway, good news for anxious shoppers, but bad news for retail employees. GameStop has announced plans to stay open this Thanksgiving. Over the past few years, the company has had an on-again, off-again policy regarding Thanksgiving hours, but according to a representative speaking with Kotaku, this decision was made, quote, to better serve our guests with their evolving holiday shopping needs. This year, GameStop will open its stores for a shortened and limited time on Thanksgiving. Many of our store associates and guests have asked for this. We have heard the request and are making an adjustment to our previous position on this topic, end quote. This actually makes a lot of sense, because if you've ever worked in retail, you hate days off. Thanksgiving, I want to go to work. You just got to get back to work as soon as you can. You want people screaming in your face about products and whatnot. That's a fun job. So yeah, totally shitty for the employees. But this does show that GameStop has some faith, or at least an increased amount of faith in this holiday season, because it's not exactly free for GameStop to have their stores open on Thanksgiving. They have to pay for their employees for being there, and usually they need more employees because they get bum rushed. Hopefully, they will actually fully supply their stores with the right amount of employees so no one is getting tortured by a line of people. Clearly, they believe that they will get a return on their investment. I just hope the employees there will at least get overtime pay. I just hope. Come on. And finally, before we get to the charts, a longtime Bioware designer, Corey Gasper, has passed away. His work can be seen in Mass Effect 2 and 3, Sonic Chronicles, Dragon Age Origins, and the upcoming Anthem. If you head over to Bioware's blog, you can actually donate money to help his son, who is still apparently very young. A very sad story, but we can make a positive out of it, donate some money over at the Bioware blog. Now let's move on to the charts. This week we actually have the top 10 most downloaded, most purchased games from the PlayStation Network for the month of July. If you're ever wondering why don't I do this for the Nintendo Switch or the Xbox One, it's because they don't provide those lists. When they do, I'll cover them, I promise. So over on the PlayStation Network for the month of July, number 10 was EA Sports UFC 2, which I believe was on sale. Number 9 was Ratchet & Clank, an awesome game from last year. Number 8 was Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered, which is kind of disappointing because they hyped up that game was going to sell well. Number 7 was Minecraft PlayStation 4 Edition, because of course it was. Number 6 was Grand Theft Auto 5, because of course it was. Number 5 was Rocket League, because of course it was. Number 4 was Friday the 13th, the game, which of course was the most downloaded game in June, so pretty impressive that it's still in the top 5 slot, especially for an indie game. Number 3 was God of War 3 Remastered, which I believe had a sale. Number 2 was Middle of Earth Shadow of Mordor Game of the Year Edition, which I believe had a sale. And number 1, of course, is Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. But enough about digital storefronts. What happened over in the United Kingdom? Well, I'm glad you asked because I have the results right here. Here are the top 10 best-selling UK games of the past week. Starting off with number 10, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Recon Wildlands, followed by number 9, FIFA 17. Number 8, Rugby League Live 4. Something tells me Rugby League will not do well elsewhere outside the UK. Number 7 was Miitopia on the 3DS. Number 6 was Dishonored 2. Glad to see that back in the top 10. That's a great game. Number 5 was Doom. Once again, another great game. Number 4 was Fallout 4. Terrible game, but what are you going to do? Number 3 was Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 2 was Splatoon for its debut week. Oh no, for its second week in a row. It's still in number 2 because number 1 is Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. Did you pay attention? Did you notice any difference from last week? That's right, Final Fantasy XII is off the list. It was number 1, now it's gone. Them's the breaks. Now let's go over to Japan to find one of the 10 best-selling games over here, and let's see if we can find Final Fantasy XII. Did it survive the Japanese charts? Well, number 10 was ARMS on the Nintendo Switch. Number 9 was Kenka Banko Onti My Honey of Absolute Perfection on the PlayStation Vita. That's a real game. Number 8 was Sumikoku Garushi Koko Doko Nan Desu on the 3DS. Number 7 was Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, so there you go. It was number 7. It fell off of the UK charts, but it's still alive here. Number 6 was Hey Pikmin on the 3DS. Number 5 was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Nintendo Switch. Number 4 was Layton's Mystery Journey, Kathleen and the Millionaire's Conspiracy on the 3DS. Number 3 was Splatoon 2. What? But Splatoon 2 did so well last week. Why isn't it number 1 again? Well, Splatoon 2 sold really well. And I mean really well. But these next 2 games blew it out of the water. Number 2 was Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of the Elusive Age on the PlayStation 4. And number 1 was Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of the Elusive Age on the 3DS. All told, the 3DS and the PlayStation 4 versions sold over 2 million copies in 1 week in Japan. In 1 week. I cannot stress how huge that is for Japan. We talk about the numbers every single week. Remember last week it was 600,000 for Splatoon 2. My God, 600,000. Who's ever going to beat that? 2 million. 2 million. 1.1 million on the 3DS alone. That is insane for 1 week sales. So, how did the consoles do? Let's talk about the best-selling consoles over in Japan from best to worst. Starting off with the new 2DS LL, which sold 110,963. 110,000 consoles sold in less than a week. Amazing. The Switch sold 89,314 in less than a week. That is bonkers. The PlayStation 4 sold 82,368. Which is also insane. It's unbelievable. Like all of these consoles, except for the Switch, just like had an increase of like 75%. New 3DS LL sold 26,587. PlayStation 4 Pro sold 10,988. PlayStation Vita sold 4,967. 2DS sold 3,680. New 3DS sold 1,370. Wii U sold 142. PlayStation 3 sold 121. And in last place for the second week in a row, it's the Xbox One with 94. But that's up from last week's 77. Look on the bright side, Xbox. But that's going to have to do it for the Chart Park, the land where money grows on trees. We have now come to the final segment of the show. This is where we take a look back at the week that was 10 years ago and beyond to find out if there's any anniversaries worth talking about, and there usually is. It's a little something we like to call Strong History. 11 years ago, on the Xbox 360, Dead Rising, yes, the first Dead Rising was released. This is, hands down, one of my favorite games of all time. No exaggeration, I completely adore Dead Rising. In fact, I actually replayed it last year, and it holds up brilliantly. But back when it was released in 2006, players were mostly upset. Now, I'm not saying that the Xbox 360 kind of sucked when it came out, but the Xbox 360 kind of sucked when it came out. I guess that is exactly what I'm saying then. But almost every game that was on the Xbox 360 lacked the magic of the prior generation. Perfect Dark Zero was boring, Quake 4 was the sequel nobody wanted, and the outfit, no one even talks about the outfit. But there was one hope on the horizon. Capcom announced an open-world zombie game. Hundreds upon hundreds of zombies on screen at once. Nothing like that had ever been done before. And best of all, Mr. Kenji Inafune, the man behind Mega Man, would oversee production. Finally, we would have a Grand Theft Auto, but it would be like horror-themed. How awesome is that? Well, when Dead Rising finally released in 2006, fans' expectations were shattered. Oh sure, it was an open world alright, but there was never a moment to sit back and have your freedom. You see, Dead Rising took place over a 72-hour span, which of course is sped up. It's not real time. You don't have to play the game for 3 days in a row. And nearly every hour of the day, there was always a mission to complete. There was a place to go. There was a thing to do or a survivor to save. And if you didn't happen to reach those mandatory areas in time, it'd straight up tell you that you lost the game. How bullshit is that? But what it didn't tell you is that you could start over and bring over your player progress. The game starred a war journalist named Frank West, who was kind of a useless slub, but the more experience he gained fighting these zombies, the more he became a real threat. By the end, he could rip zombies apart with his bare hands. And before you knew it, you could play those levels that you struggled with before and destroy everything in sight. Not to mention nearly every object, from stuffed animals to umbrellas to 2x4s, anything laying around could become a weapon. And it was all for the taking, and best of all, it all took place in a mall. So after a while, you would just see a shop in the distance and know exactly what kind of weapons would be inside. Well, there was one problem with the game that I'm willing to admit. The game text was really small and hard to read. But other than that, Dead Rising was a great game that most people didn't really give a chance, and that's sad. 12 years ago, on the Nintendo DS, Jump Superstars was released. So if you're into anime today, let me tell you, you've got it made, because back in the day, everything was physical. There weren't streaming services, you weren't downloading games on handheld devices. That just didn't happen, which meant it had to be fairly popular in the first place to be brought over to America, or at least to make sure that they would work out the deals to even bring it over to America. And the perfect example of this was Jump Superstars. This was a game that was very similar to Smash Bros, except it featured all the characters from Sojin Jump. I'm talking Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, One Piece, and more, all battling in a single game. How amazing is that? But because nearly every series was licensed by a different distributor, it would have been a nightmare to bring over to America. And so it never arrived. Even though I saw somebody on Wikipedia claiming it did. No, it didn't. You lying. Whatever. Moving on. 16 years ago, on the Sega Dreamcast, in Japan, Shenmue 2 was released. Now, once again, this is one of my favorite games of all time, and yes, I could go on about it for a while, but I will try to keep this short. This is essentially Shenmue 1.5. Now, obviously, the story continues from the first games in terms of canon, but when you're talking about development, much of Shenmue 2 was originally supposed to be in Shenmue 1, but as they edged closer to having an $80 million budget, Sega stepped in and was like, hey, can you maybe put a game out? That would be kind of cool. Let's put something out. And Yu Suzuki was like, alright, we'll take the first chapter and we'll release it on its own. But, Shenmue, really, that no matter how well that did, it couldn't prevent them from going third party, and to be honest, it didn't sell that well. In fact, I never even played the Dreamcast version on the Sega console. I had to wait until 2002 to play it on the Xbox release. But it was so worth the wait, because the game had just everything. Everything was a vast improvement from the original. You would go from a very small Japanese shipping town to a sprawling Chinese city. There were fighting competitions, crazy people with chainsaws, and a little bit of espionage. And it's all the richer because you know who Ryo is and where he came from. You've been to that small Japanese town he grew up in. You totally understand that when he sees that chainsaw coming towards him, it's unlike anything he's ever seen before. Anyway, I'll cut it short. It's a great game. I love Shenmue 2. 17 years ago, on the original PlayStation, Tenchu 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins. There are few franchises that have been as abused as Tenchu, and yet still deserve a second chance. This game came out, or the original Tenchu came out, a few months before Metal Gear Solid and Thief, which means that it was the very first major 3D stealth game. You played as either Rikamura or Ayami, who were two ninja assassins that scoured the snowy rooftops of Japan in the 1700s? 1600s, 1700s? I'm not really sure, but you were basically avoiding detection all the time before murdering your target. It was sort of like Hitman, in a way. Only problem was, the AI was a little bit too good, and the draw distances were too bad. I mean, I went back and played it recently, and anything beyond 4 feet, it's just pitch black. The game can't render it. It's horrible. But Acquire, the developers, clearly learned a few tricks, because in part 2, the first stage is in the daytime, and you can see everything. The environments are far more detailed, the objectives were more expanded, and the murder animations, because if you walked up and attacked a person before they detected you, you go into this murder animation, they were so awesome and brutal and gory and good. And it even had a level editor before Tony Hawk 2. So, despite being ahead of the curve in so many ways, the Tenchu series would quickly fall in quality. A lot of this had to do with the IP being bounced around from different developers, because it went from Acquire, the original guys that made part 1 and part 2, to K2 LLC, and then Polygon Magic, and then From Software, yes, the Dark Souls team, and then finally it went back to Acquire, and they made a game for the Wii in 2009 called Shadow Assassins, which meant it had really gimmicky motion controls. It's been 8 years since we've seen a Tenchu game, and yes, it's been given more than enough chances, but to this day, there's nothing quite like Tenchu, so I'd be glad to see a sequel. I think other people would too. It almost reminds you of my question I had at the beginning of the show. Moving on. 18 years ago in 1999, on the PC, System Shock 2 was released, and we're really going to cut this one short because I've never actually completed System Shock 2, but the game was designed by Ken Levine, the guy who would also go on to create BioShock, which of course was influenced by System Shock, but also Ken Levine worked on the first Thief game. See how that all ties together? We're talking about stealth games? Whatever. 22 years ago, on the Super Nintendo, Ninja Gaiden Trilogy was released. Now get this, it's 1995, the Sega Saturn is out, and the PlayStation 1 is going to be out in a month. And Temco is re-releasing 8-bit NES games on the Super Nintendo. The exact same games, just on the Super Nintendo. Who the hell cares? Well, apparently not many people did, because few copies were produced and sold, which is why if you're a collector, you better be ready to shell out at least $250 for a loose cart or $350 for a complete in box. And that's just the stuff I was able to find on certain websites, and I'm not even sure if they were real copies. I've seen some people say it would cost around $800 for a complete in box Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. Sheesh. Should have bought it when it was new. Also 22 years ago, on the PlayStation, Street Fighter the movie, the game was released, and in case you don't know, Street Fighter was turned into a movie back in 1994. It bears little to no resemblance to the games themselves. Don't get me wrong, the costumes for Street Fighter the movie looked good, but the actors didn't fit the characters at all. Not to mention, Guile was played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, who doesn't really sound like an American hero, and Ryu and Ken were just background characters. Totally miswritten, bad script, didn't make any sense. Now, if that wasn't strange enough, Capcom actually produced a game based off the movie, based off the game, and in an odd nod to their competitor Mortal Kombat, they digitized their actors. So they would take pictures of them and put them in the game and then animate them. And by most accounts, the game is a disaster. But that's not the entire story. You see, the PlayStation 1 version, which is the one that most people know about, and I actually own a copy of, that's the bad one. That's the bad game. It's miserable, it has a low frame rate, it's garbage. But the arcade and Saturn versions of this game are actually pretty good, even if it pales in comparison to any real Street Fighter game. Seriously, if you got a Saturn, or if you happen to have MAME on your computer, give it a try. I think you'll be surprised. Also 22 years ago, on the Game Boy, Wario Blast featuring Bomberman was released in Japan. Now this is one of those games where I can't find any information on, but in case you don't know, Wario Blast was one of the first games to star Wario as a playable character. And if you were to believe the marketing hype, this also featured an appearance by Bomberman. But nope, that is total bullshit, because this is just a Bomberman game that happens to have Wario in it. Heck, look at the development team. It's the people that make all the Bomberman games. It's even the team from Hudson Soft. But they wanted you to believe that, oh, this is a Wario game that has a special appearance by Bomberman. Total bullshit. 24 years ago, on the Neo Geo, Samurai Showdown was released. Now, this was a really good fighting game. I really like Part 2 a lot better, and normally I would talk about the history of it, but there's very little information on the development of Samurai Showdown, except for a brand new article by James Melky that was put up back in April. So head over to Polygon and read that article, and turn off your ad block. It's a really fascinating read. I can't really do it justice. I was skimming through them like, oh, I can't cover this. And finally, 31 years ago, Metroid was released on the Famicom Disk System in Japan, which means that they got to save their game. They didn't have to use passwords. Well, this is going to be an insanely long episode, so I'm going to cut this one short as well. After all, it's a Nintendo game. Trust me, there's going to be plenty of people talking about it over the next week. I'd rather cover things that people don't talk about, like Tenchu. But I think it's worth taking this conversation back to the original part of the show. See, when Metroid launched back in 1986, there wasn't anything else quite like it. The world was open for exploration, you gained new abilities, and they gained access to new environments. Some people would say that that is a Zelda concept, but not really. Zelda didn't quite have that worked out yet, the way that Metroid did. So Metroid was highly original, and it was also an action game. So original, in fact, that no one really tried to rip it off, with the exception being Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. But look at today. Metroidvanias are fairly common. There's Dust, Cave Story, Shadow Complex, Guacamelee, and a bunch more. There's even bad Metroidvanias. Look at 2014 Strider. And all came together over a long period of time, because some people really appreciated that game, and over the decades, they made their own versions. Just like what I think will happen with roguelikes. But that's going to have to do it for Strong History. Also, there's a new Metroid coming out this month. I guess I just brought that up, but I didn't. It's too late. Whatever. But now it is time to close up the show. Remember, if you want to answer that question that I said at the beginning of the show, tell me, goddammit. Just check the description. You'll find all the links right there. Phone number, text messages, whatever. Emails. Leave a message on YouTube. Do that for me. What's going to be coming up this week? I'm going to be putting up a lot of those developer interviews. That's the big plan for this week. That's actually what I'm going to be sitting down and doing. And other stuff, but I cannot really talk about at the moment. I'll let you know when other things happen. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. You can follow me at Dr. Crychop. That's at Dr. Crychop. I'm always tweeting. Or you can follow Video Games Are Dumb at VGA Dumb on Twitter. You can even answer the question through Twitter. But yes, we need to close out the show, just like they closed down Tenchu. Such a great franchise that just was mishandled and died. But the Pressure Cast will never die, because the Pressure Cast is forever. See you guys